Hi, welcome to Ascend's Fireside Chat with Belinda Runkle. I'm Shivani Berry, CEO and founder of Ascend. Ascend offers online leadership programs to help women advance into leadership roles. I was inspired to found Ascend because when I was making that transition into leadership, I learned the critical skills to get buy-in and lead by honestly making a lot of mistakes. Some guidance were primarily a lot of mistakes. So I decided to create the leadership program that I wish I had access to when I was making that transition. Because my mission is to elevate more women into leadership. And we're doing it. We've had program members from companies like Facebook, LinkedIn, Box gain confidence, be able to consistently get buy-in from stakeholders, including dominant personalities, and grow in their careers. So much of the program is curated by leaders who have been in your shoes. I really think we need to have more open and honest conversations around what it takes to move into and be successful in management. That's why we have these fireside chats where we can have conversations with successful women leaders about their experiences and learn from them. I'm really excited today to chat with Belinda Runkle, who is an engineering director at Google. I first met and learned about Belinda when she was sharing leadership advice at an event, and I found her to be incredibly real, insightful, and successful. Coincidentally, some of my former colleagues had worked with Belinda in the past and raved about her. I knew that we had to have this conversation with her. I'm really looking forward to it. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and have some great takeaways that you can apply to your career. So, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited for our conversation.
Thank you, Shivani. It's super awesome to be here. I'm honored to be your invited guest, so thanks.
Thanks so much. So, let's kick it off by hearing a little bit about yourself. Do you mind briefly introducing your career and kind of like who you are?
Sure, definitely. So I'm currently the director of engineering at Google Cloud. I'm responsible for a collection of teams that run all of the commercialization and go-to-market engines for cloud. So if you think of all of the systems that we use to measure, usage of different products by our customers, that then gets converted into dollars, into bills, and that gets plumbed, all the way through the rest of the Google infrastructure to drive things like invoices and taxing. It also powers all of the cost management features for our customers so that they can see what they're spending, take control of their cloud spend, commit to new forms of discounts, things like that. So really everything that's very commercialization focused is within the realm of what we do. Prior to this, sort of stepping way back, the very beginning of my career, I'm a little bit different from most folks, and I come from a pretty non-traditional tech background. I started out in college really wanting to be an anthropologist when I grew up. And for me, it was really about understanding people and really understanding cultures and systems and values. And as much as I really loved it once I was in college, I discovered that one of the sort of ironies of anthropology is that the discipline is actually rooted in sort of, colonialist, like a colonialist viewpoint. And so when I was before college, I had envisioned myself, right, like I'll be an anthropologist and I'll, go and live in some, foreign location and live with the natives. And, I was going to basically walk into a National Geographic magazine from like 1977. And like, that was my dream of my life. And, the things that I learned in college really made me sort of question whether or not that was like a great career choice or even great for the very cultures and peoples that I wanted to live with and get to know better. So I actually ended up switching to studio art. And studio art for me was something that I always really enjoyed doing. And coming out of college, I didn't really know what I was going to do, but one of my very first jobs out of college was being able to do technical support. It was one of these offshore centers. And luckily, I got on the team for Microsoft, and we were supporting Windows 95 and IE6, which basically starts to date the beginning of my tech career. But Microsoft's training was pretty amazing. I got to learn a lot of CS fundamentals, how operating systems work, how browsers work, networking basics. And what I found is that I was actually pretty good at it. I was pretty good at picking up the technical concepts pretty quickly. But the other part of the job was being good with people and being able to explain these concepts and help users and help customers and solve problems that, to them were, ambiguous and difficult. And for me, that was like a great spark. It was like the signal that like, oh, maybe there is kind of this like very different career choice that I could go on. Interestingly, when I was in college, I took like a C++ class in my senior year, just out of curiosity. I had no idea why I needed a C++ class. I skipped like all the CS intros and all of that. And in learning it, I at the time I was like, I don't really think this is going to be something I want to spend my whole life doing. Writing code and managing memory is just, it's not my jam, I guess. The irony, of course, is that I've spent now over 20 years in software engineering and in tech. So clearly, college self had no idea what the future held. The work that I did at Microsoft was fairly short-lived. I rolled into a number of different sort of IT-centric roles. So everything from installing new hard drives and memory. Eventually, I landed at a smaller startup, and that was really sort of the proper beginning of my tech career. I had a very, very entry level role as an engineer there, and because it was like a very young startup, right? They were building systems. Those systems were pretty brittle. Stuff fell apart. Half of what we tried to get done ended up in the error logs. And so my job as a fledgling engineer was to basically go and dive into error logs, understand what happened, and essentially build post processing that would allow us to continue to successfully process customer data, drive revenue, all the good things. Shortly after learning even how to do that job, which it was sort of barely a well-defined job to begin with. We were scaling well enough and business went well enough that we needed to grow the team, and so all of a sudden I found myself as a manager, and that to me was a huge surprise that within a couple of years of even starting like a real tech job, now I'm like responsible for other people, and quickly found myself running a team of about 8 folks. I ended up staying in this particular company for 9 years, which was a pretty long time in retrospect. And the reason that I stayed is because for me, my job changed every single year. We continued to grow. We had great success. And over that 9-year term, I was able to take on greater and greater responsibility. Eventually I found myself as the director of engineering, and for me that was a huge milestone, because there were other people at this company that were far more experienced. They had CS backgrounds. They'd worked in a lot of other companies. There was a part of me that saw that opportunity and frankly just asked, like, why me? And I think a lot of it was because I was willing to solve problems. I could work well with lots of different people, not just with engineering and across. Folks essentially trusted me to continue to run the business and help us grow. Uh, 9 years presented really great booms. Somewhere around 2008, a recession hit, and I also found myself on the bus side of that. I ended up laying off the majority of my team over the course of the last year that I was there, in a series of about 7 layoffs. And after that, I decided to maybe work on a different job, and I was in layoff number 8, by the way. But after that, I really sort of stepped back and started to ask myself, like, what did I want for my next career? And looking at the 9 years, that 9 years was an incredible slog. Like, I was very tired, right? I'd gotten very good at like compartmentalizing all the things that I was doing and inspiring my team and getting them to work at frankly unsustainable hours. And by the end of that 9-year run, I was just kind of done. Like, I actually wanted a little bit more of a chill job. And so I stepped into a much smaller startup. I actually got to do more hands-on work. I was writing more code, and that was very satisfying, being part of that smaller startup. In a way, one of the things I really loved about that particular startup, and this was in the education space, is the founders for that group. They were very different from most of your traditional sort of VC-led companies. They very much had a very organic style of growth, and what I really loved about them, because they were education focused, is they had a really deep belief in developing people. And so, for instance, the founders, we would have these weekly leadership meetings. In our leadership meetings, we would all sit and read Daily Drucker together, and we would spend time taking some financial concept and breaking it down and talking about it, and then explaining how could we apply it to our business and our world. And in a way, it was almost like a mini MBA camp, as part of my job. But what I found in practice is, I also, as much as I was sort of tired from that big 9-year sprawl, and I loved the sort of comfort and safety of the smaller startup, I was actually eager for more excitement, more growth. Another rocket ship ride, another roller coaster, maybe. After that, I joined New Relic, and New Relic for me was very carefully chosen. I chose it based on the market, on what I saw as like a really solid set of founders and VCs. But also the product was a product that I had used, and it was like a really cool product already, even though being really early. And so I jumped on early at New Relic as a line manager, and it was great. It was just the jumping on the rocket ride and then not asking what seat you get. Like, this is definitely one of those. And so for me, I was at New Relic for the course of about 6 years, from line manager, quickly went through a series of promotions, grew as the company grew, and spent the last 3 years there as the VP of APM, which is like the flagship product that has driven most of the revenue for New Relic in that time. For me, a lot of my success at New Relic was, I can look back and, much of it was helping to drive business success, helping to build great teams, really helping to distill an amazing culture. But also, I had great backing, just great sponsorship and leadership all throughout my way here. People that I was learning from, but also people who were willing to open doors and give me opportunities as the company continued to grow, which was like an amazing place to be in. I did a short stint at Fastly prior to coming to Google. With Fastly, I was in charge of the product and engineering, so the control plane for their CDN. And then Google for me has been really kind of an amazing step up into like a whole new layer of scale and opportunity and diversity of products. I mean, Google is really an amazing place, and there's just so much that I'm going to continue to learn here. And it's fantastic to be able to sort of tell my story about how I even got to this place. Looking back, it's just been such a fast ride. It's amazing how quickly time flies when you're having fun, but also sometimes when you're just super challenged and your head's down and you forget that the world is just like zooming by you. So yeah, thanks for the question. Hopefully that provides a little bit of illustration to my career background.
Yes, what a great journey. I especially like that it wasn't a set path. I think we often feel like we have to go down a certain path to get to, engineering director at Google, but your journey is windy and has ups and downs. And thank you for sharing all of that. I think that's really insightful. One of the things that you talk about, you mentioned, was about inspiring teams. So I'd love to hear, like, what's one action you do to inspire your team?
Yeah, definitely. I think most of the time when we say we want to inspire teams or we say we want to motivate teams, I mean, I think a good starting place is that most people come with motivation already pre-installed, right? Like when you show up at a new job or a new project or a new company, like you're already motivated, right? Like you already want to be impactful and have great relationships and make, cool things happen. And so I think for us as leaders, a lot of the time when we want to inspire, it's really just connecting that like battery pack of motivation in every single person to stuff that the company's wanting to get done. Um, I personally find a lot of engineering teams are super motivated by understanding how they're going to create impact in the world, whether it's the customer, whether that's impact on other teams. But I think being able to connect your work to things that like really move the needle or change things or just sort of, subvert the dominant paradigm, like whatever it is that helps you feel like that your work is significant and that it matters, is often like just that's what's needed to kind of connect those dots. I think the other part of inspiration too, and this is something that I've had to learn, is as a leader, it's very easy for us to basically want to try to explain and prescribe the whole picture, right? Like tell you exactly how it's going to be and how you're going to get there. And I've actually found it to be more powerful to not, I call this, don't complete the puzzle, right? Like you want to lay out enough of a picture that people can start to see the same picture as you. But if you actually go and try to put all the pieces in place, like there's no room for anyone else to actually contribute to the picture or to contribute their own vision or their own piece. And so I always look for opportunities when I'm trying to like push some new big thing or new idea to let everybody contribute to the puzzle. Because I think then we all feel ownership of it. We all feel like it's our thing and not management's thing or the CEO's thing. And I think that's a really powerful part of just creating that engagement, is just knowing that you have some control and some influence on things, whether it's local to you or whether it's part of this bigger picture.
Yeah, that's so true. And one thing I've heard you mention before is around psychological safety to help drive that engagement. How do you create that psychological safety on your team?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really easy to break is probably the main thing that I've learned about psychological safety. I think as managers, we all believe that we have it and we can do things that just destroy it in an instance. It's really amazing. Uh, I personally, one of the main tools that I try to use around psych safety is transparency, right? If you think about what builds trust in relationships in general, right? It's being honest, right? And so I think being transparent as a leader, whether you're transparent about how you feel, how you're making decisions, what criteria you're looking at, anything that frankly is more about you being more truthful and more direct, but in a way that people can hear it and people can listen and feel that it's not a judgment of them, but really more an opportunity, a way that we can do things better, or a recognition of the situation that the person is in, whether it's a project or a relationship or a market. And so for me, I think really focusing on that transparency, even though it can be super uncomfortable. I, for one, I think it's just like table stakes for psychological safety.
I think that's a good call out, the transparency, but especially making sure it's clear that it's not a judgment on them. So often we get stuck in our own head and we create that narrative. And so you have to proactively be able to call it out and be like, actually, I wasn't even thinking about this, by the way. Like, here's actually the reasons why I made that decision. So that's a really important call out. And switching gears a bit, let's talk about your career. So, how have sponsors played a role in your career growth?
Yeah, definitely. I didn't even know what the word sponsors really meant a few years ago. And it's been interesting. One of the things that I did at New Relic is I was part of the DEI Council. And I had really zero experience in diversity inclusion, right? I'm, one of the people that would benefit from diversity inclusion. I check a lot of boxes in a DE&I way, but I didn't know anything about like how to drive inclusion or how to improve diversity. And so I actually spent a lot of time just reading all the things that I could about, how do you make it better? In what ways have these problems been solved at other companies? And I think the engineer in me being just like super full of hubris, like I just want to do the things that work, right? Like I want to do like the things that work, lowest effort, highest impact, right? That's what we want to do as engineers. Uh, and so the one that I discovered was sponsorship. I can't claim discovery of it. There's lots of great writing about the power of sponsorship, but sponsorship basically is like the one cool trick that all other factors being controlled. It's the one cool trick that actually has a pronounced and consistent impact on career development. Whether that's gaining access to new roles, getting on a board seat of a public company, all of these things actually are acquired through sponsorship. In a pretty phenomenal way, and that actually even more so for women and underrepresented minorities. So, now that I understood that, I've been able to look back and go, oh, actually, so much of my past I'd looked as, right, this is my own doing, my own pulled up by the bootstraps, hard work and my own motivations. But now that I have this as this lens, I can also go back and go like, actually, I had pretty amazing sponsorship all through my career. I probably owe some more thank you notes out there. Looking at New Relic for an example, I had great sponsorship in my management team, but the things that really helped me get to the VP level position is I was able to secure sponsorship from our head of revenue, from our CIO, people who really weren't directly in my day-to-day work path. And I didn't, there was never this conversation, right? I didn't go to them and be like, well, will you please be my sponsor? But I was able to work on things that they cared about. And I was able to work with folks in their organization to help generate outcomes that they cared about. So in the case of the CRO, I'm working very closely with professional engineering and sales engineering on improving our product and making it easier for us to improve customer adoption and remove blockers. And a lot of that work essentially helped frame teams that were essentially missing in the sales organization, right? So we went and did this experiment, had great success, and then the sales team then actually built real teams and real processes around those successes. And so the work that I did was actually helpful in being able to shape the organization in addition to growing sales. So knowing, for instance, that that work really helped to buy me this credibility with the CRO. It meant that that person and the other folks that have been my sponsor in the past were essentially advocating for me, in places rooms that I would never enter, right? Conversations I would never get to be a part of. and sort of learning about that, much later in my career, it's incredibly humbling, right? It's incredibly humbling to have someone advocate for you like that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I especially love how some of your sponsors who weren't in the engineering function, I think we often think that our sponsors have to be in our line of reporting, but
Yeah.
actually your sponsor can be anyone who's willing to advocate for you and is familiar with your work. So thank you for calling that out. Now, as just to wrap up and kind of as our final question, before we hop into this chat, we both were talking about how we love talking about our mistakes. And I think we both can agree that we often talk about successes. We always talk about successes, but we rarely talk about the failures. In reality, most successes have a bunch of failures behind them. So can you share one failure in your career and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, definitely. I think when I look back on my career and there have been all kinds of interesting failures, but the ones that always keep me up at night, I'm staring at the ceiling, worrying about them, have always been challenges with relationships. And so, for instance, I can see places where because I hadn't built the right relationship, or there had been a point of friction, I actually created a damaging impact. And sometimes those damaging impacts would mean that I didn't get to actually sort of work on the problem with the person, right? Let me try to think of a good example. Here's a good example. So for instance, one of my mistakes that I made is early on, I had this like very high priority project that my teams were working on, and they were working really closely with a number of high visibility executives. And one of those leaders, because they felt so under the gun, like they were under intense pressure to get this project done. I think they were very well intentioned, but they basically grabbed a bunch of the team members, put them all in a room, and basically, I think that person was trying to inspire them. They were trying to create this like positive pressure around getting the project done, but instead it was incredibly damaging, very threatening to a bunch of folks. Actually, they didn't even have some of the people that they'd pulled into the room weren't even from the right team or working on the project in question. It had this like very negative impact, and so. Given that this was my team and I got to hear all of the sort of fallout from it, I found myself in a leadership meeting, and I actually yelled at the person in the meeting. I'm embarrassed to say, and like not even in the same room, right? Like this was like me yelling at a screen because the other person's in another office, like completely far away. And like in that moment, it felt so good, right? Like I'm just telling them how it is, and everyone else gets to hear it, and it's like we're having justice right now. Like that's what's happening in my head. Looking back, that was a huge error, right? Because one, I damaged a relationship, right? Like I basically took something that could have easily been a much more private conversation done in safety. This was actually a person I respected too, right? I thought very highly of them and definitely saw them as a teammate. But the fact that I used this moment to actually sort of berate them for the thing that had happened, it was still a bad idea, but it was done under these great intentions, right? And I think I turned it into a much more negative event than it needed to be. And so looking back, it's a great example of where, because the relationship isn't in the state that it needs to be, instead of feeling comfortable taking it directly to the person, I put it on a stage and made the relationship worse. Now, we made up. It's fine. We can all laugh at it now. But looking back, it's moments like those where the relationship needs to be there, and also as a leader you have to maintain a certain semblance of emotional control, and you also, when other people make mistakes, you have to let them save face too. A public berating frankly helps no one, even though it can feel super good to be right. It doesn't help me, it doesn't help the team, it doesn't help that person, it doesn't help the company. And so looking back, I think any place where I feel I've taken some other action that's not going directly to the person and having that conversation, it's usually been a bad thing. And so, more often than not, the best way to resolve these kinds of issues is person to person, face to face, and create that psychological safety for yourselves to be able to have the right level of conversation.
This very much resonates with me. Also, I would say my biggest failures have also been around relationships. And I just realized that it is your ability to build those relationships and to get buy-in that help you truly be successful.
Yeah.
And that was a huge reason why I founded Ascend and started the leadership program, because I was like, other people should just be able to learn these skills in a practical manner, in a really structured way. So thank you for sharing that. Love that story. Agree, like criticize privately, praise publicly. And yeah, just learn from your mistakes and grow from that.
Totally.
Belinda, this has been amazing. I have so many great insights and nuggets to take away. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Shivani. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm so excited to see the program that you've launched. I know it's going to benefit so many other women, and I wish something like that had been around when I was starting my career, but I'm glad it's here now.